ICQ Podcast episode 401, MFJ8504 review and understanding HF controls. Hello fellow Amateur Radio enthusiasts and welcome to this our 401st episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Paul Coppin, Mike Zero, Yankee Mike Juliet and our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin M1MRB, Dan, KB6 November Uniform, Caryn, KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, and Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode is a double feature as we review the MFJ8504, and we also have a feature about understanding HF controls. Well, as always, as we say, our show is brought to you advert-free every fortnight because of your very kind support. And this episode, along with our monthly and annual subscription donors, Paul Coppin, Mike Zero, Yankee Mike Juliet, sent us off a one-off donation. And he's letting us know that he runs an internet station, Gemini DX, and he retransmits a number of podcasts, including the ICQ podcast. And he wanted to show us his support for what we do and keep up the good work. So just to explain it to anybody who's not sure, and there's a few people that do this already, we have a Creative Commons copyright agreement, which basically means in a nutshell you can rebroadcast the ICQ podcast in any way you wish, as long as you send it out in its entirety. So you can't chop out, say, the feature, or you can't chop out the news section and get rid of the donors, etc. You have to rebroadcast it in its entirety. And to do that, you can do that without even asking permission. It's always good to know, because then obviously we can let people know where else you can find the show, but you can do it for now. And this is because of our model where we don't take advertising. Because if we took advertising, we'd have to know how many people actually listen to the show for the invoicing, billing, etc. That requires because of that. So, as I say, because of that, our model, you can basically distribute our show amongst your friends, your club mates, etc. on internet radio stations, on repeaters in certain places where you can, on shortwave radio broadcasts, etc. across the board. So, anybody that wishes to rebroadcast our show, you can certainly do it under the Creative Commons agreement. If you're not sure, drop us a line and we'll fill you in the details. And as I say, if you find value in what we do, as Paul has done, as I say, a donation to us keeps us advert free, and as I say, keeps us producing the show. So thanks, Paul, for doing that for us. And again, many thanks to our monthly subscription donors. Now, again, if you found value in what we do in any way, shape, or form, it's a very easy way of you taking part and helping us out. You go to icqpodcast.com/donate and as I say, send that donation our way, and as I say, we will certainly appreciate it and put it towards our running costs to keep our show advert free and produced for you every single fortnight. Right, well, now we're going to get on with that show, and we're going to join Martin, Dan, Caryn and Ed to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including is your multimeter lying, and FCC dives into satellites. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys. Welcome to episode 401 of the ICQ podcast, and tonight's roundtable for that episode 401 as we climb that big mountain to 500. But we're on the way now, guys. Tonight I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
Yeah, I think it's going pretty well, Dan. So good to have you on. Also got Caryn Eve Murray, KD2GUT. Hi, Caryn.
Hello, Martin. Very good to be here, as always.
Yeah, good to have you. And last but not least, in Germany, I have Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi, mate. And Edmund M1MRB, unfortunately, can't make it tonight, but we will be back with us on our next episode. So, looking forward to that. Right, let's look at the news stories. There's quite a few to go today. Dan, can I ask you to do this one first? But Ria Jairam, is it?
Jairam, yeah.
Yeah, N2RJ has just joined the board of the ARDC.
Right. So Ria is a former now ARRL director from the Hudson Division. She's resigned her position with the ARRL and will be joining ARDC as one of our board members. and we're all fairly excited about that. She has some pretty solid credentials in the amateur radio community, and I think she's going to be a great addition to our board.
Certainly sounds it. Certainly sounds it. And I know that she's very progressive in what she does and does a lot of work. So it should be very good for you. Caryn, what's your thoughts?
Well, Martin, I was very excited to hear this news because, first of all, I think ARDC does literally a world of good to the amateur radio community, and I think harnessing Rhea's talents there's going to be an amazing chemistry there. I'll add that I do live in the division of ARRL that Rhea had served, and I can personally vouch for. First of all, she is pleasant. She is great to be around. She activated with our club 1 year at the Fire Island Lighthouse here in New York on the shore. She puts her heart into whatever she does, really is a communicator. So ARRL's loss is ARDC's gain, and I expect her to continue to do great things. I'm really, really happy for her.
Yeah. Well, at least she's still involved at a fairly high level within amateur radio of organising us. So that is going to be a good thing. Somebody who's has those skills, really good that she has joined the ARDC. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, Rhea's a very high-profile amateur, as in she's very well known worldwide. She also uses social media, especially YouTube, quite effectively, which is a talent that a lot of us don't have. And yeah, I think definitely ARRL's loss, ARDC's win.
Yeah, certainly is, Ed, certainly is. But, well, let's wish her every success at ARDC. And we'll obviously hear more from her as the years go on. And a lady to watch out for. Who knows? She might be head of the FCC one day. But at least she'll be on our side. Move to our next news story. And this is a technical one. And we ummed and ahed about it for a while. But your multimeter might be lying to you, was the question, the headline. And this was picked up off of Hackaday. And I think sometimes people don't realise that the multimeter does its job, but there's more to measuring things at times that you have to understand more. Now, I'm going to go down again first on this one because you used to do this sort of stuff, didn't you, Dan?
Yeah, so I used to be an editor with a magazine called Test and Measurement World magazine. And I would, write about different things like this. And we always used to call these kind of articles evergreen articles because it never gets tiring to learn about how one should use test equipment properly. And we're so lucky these days. The test instruments we have now are so much better than they were, well, probably even 20 years ago, but certainly 30 or 40 years ago. But still, you have to know what your meter is capable of and what it's measuring to make sure what you're seeing is what you think you're seeing. That's where this title came from. You might be lying to you. So, just as for example, they give in the article here, so if you're wanting to measure the continuity of a feed line, for example, well, you can't just unscrew the SO2 or PL259 and put your meter across it. Why? Well, because there might be it's using DC to measure continuity, right? It's injecting a current, and then you're measuring the voltage across the two probes. Well, some antennas are directly DC shorted at the feed point. So it's going to measure a short. Well, that's true at DC, but it's not really true at RF, at the frequency the antenna is designed for. So that's an indication or a case of what they're talking about here, that your meter may be lying to you. So the moral of the story is make sure you know how the meter works and then what you're measuring. And that's the best way to interpret the results.
Yeah. It's certainly interesting. You can get some interesting results, and I'll come on to it in a minute. Ed, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I think it's horses for courses. Taking Dan's example, of course, you need an antenna analyzer if you're going to test your feed line and your antennas, but that's just one case. The general term is also pointed out, you need to understand what the meter can do, and also you need to understand the circuit that you're testing, especially if you're testing it when it's turned on, because the instrument can actually load the circuit and A, make the circuit do something different, and B, give you a faulty reading. So it's about understanding what you have. A multimeter is a very useful tool to have, and in fact, I think every amateur probably has one, be it digital or analog. And they are useful for quick tests. They're also useful for detailed tests, but for detailed tests, you have to understand what you are doing and what effect the meter is having on the circuit that you're testing. And, it's interesting that this is in Hackaday. Okay, Hackaday is like a do-it-yourself electronics magazine, website, etc. So it makes sense it's there, but it's completely applicable to amateur radio as well. And so understand the circuit, understand what you're trying to measure. And in some cases, you might say, I just need a guide level. If it's around that voltage or around that resistance, then it's probably okay, and I can go on and test the next stage. But it might not be that either, because the effect of the meter on the circuit might give you, indeed, faulty readings. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, certainly. I'm one of these people, I have both. I have an analog and a digital, and that's not just bragging, but I will always pick up the analog one because I grew up with analog meters. But yeah, you're right, you have to know how to use them. And in fairness, some of the circuitry and stuff, if you're repairing vintage radios or vintage equipment, the circuit diagrams actually have written on them, these measurements were made with a 20,000 ohm per voltmeter or a 10,000 ohm per voltmeter or whatever. So if you go measuring the voltages with your digital voltmeter on those piece of old equipment, the voltages are going to be nothing like the voltages that are on the circuit diagram. Caryn, I know you have an analog meter. Please don't feel bad about it. Analog meters are good.
Okay. I thank you for those comforting words, Martin, and I'm pleased that you are the proud owner of both. I'm going to sit out input on this one since my only experience is with the analog, and I have not really done extensive testing with it, but I'm reassured that I've still got a good tool there in my bag of tricks. So thank you.
Yeah, no problems. Well, a couple of little bits of advice is that it's whether you're going to load a circuit. Now, if possible, if you've got an analog meter, use it on the highest range possible you can get a sensible reading on. So, your multimeter will be far accurate. If you're measuring 10 volts, your multimeter will be far accurate on the 100 volt range than it will be on the 10 volt range. So, just bear that one in mind. And, just there are advantages to both. I could go on for ages about this, but, spend a bit of time and understand your test equipment. For most things, I would suggest for a beginner, you start off with a digital multimeter. But then bear in mind, my biggest soapbox shout on multimeters is the probes. The multimeter measures the voltage at the socket on the front of your multimeter, not the end of the probes. So if you've got cheap and nasty probes where the wire is so thin it's got a lot of resistance, it could be much higher voltage at the point where you're trying to measure, but you've got a resistance drop in the cable. Number two, are the cheap meters, the probes, are they safe to be used up to 1,000 volts? I very much doubt it. I very much doubt that the cable has insulation for that sort of voltage. And thirdly, yeah, they often come with 10 amp current circuits. And you look at these little leads, they go up in smoke long before they got to 10 amps. So, yeah, just be aware. It's buyer beware. Understand what you're doing. And nothing wrong with them. Nothing wrong with a cheap little meter. It'll do what it says on the tin. You just have to understand how to use it. And I think that's fair, isn't it, Dan?
Oh yeah, when I teach a tech class, what I do is when we're talking about multimeters, I have a real cheapo here in the U.S. There's a store called Harbor Freight, and they'd often even give out these multimeters because they're so cheap. I said, well, on the back here it says 1,000 volts, but I think you ought to be really careful trying to use this thing at 1,000 volts. So. Well, yeah. Be careful and understand what the limitations are.
Yeah, safety comes first. All right. I like this next story. Vacuum tubes are making a comeback in the US. There's a gentleman setting up a vacuum tube making company, and it's great that we're now going to get another market for vacuum tubes, and they're not dead. People with the old guitar amplifiers and musicians love vacuum tubes. Caryn, you've done some research on this one. What do you think?
Well, Martin, this is happy, happy news in both the music world and the amateur radio world. And it doesn't come as a surprise. People actually have been waiting for this. There's been a buzz about this for quite some time. The fellow who purchased the vacuum tube division of Western Electric, a big giant company, purchased it and had moved the plant around. I think he had 2 prior locations before settling in a community in Georgia, where he set up the plant, is using some of the same equipment that the original Western Electric division, the tube division, that they had manufactured some of their old classic, much loved vacuum tubes, and even hired some of the people who were veterans of the vacuum tube industry who know their way around the tubes. So you're not getting newbies, you're getting people who really know the industry, who really know tubes. This is accomplishing a number of things. I think, first of all, on a local standpoint, it's just a wonderful boost for the local economy anytime manufacturing comes to town. The United States has lost its foothold in manufacturing over the years, and it's nothing like bringing it back home, creating jobs, particularly if these folks are veterans of the industry. Well, they're likely to be older workers, and I say bravo for creating jobs for older workers and appreciating their track records. I think that's also quite good, and I think that it brings a lot of hope for the future in terms of innovation. Moreover, I bet you the prices are going to start to come down a bit. People's wallets are going to be hurting a little less, so it's a win-win-win all around. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it certainly would be. And equally, you're not paying import tax on valves from China or Russia, are you? So for the States, you're going to be doing very well on that one, I thought. But yeah, Ed, you must have done valves in your time because we're of a similar age. What do you think?
Yeah, well, as soon as they start producing some 320As or 640As for 2 meters and 70 SEMs and 2C39 equivalents for 23 SEMs might be of interest. But unfortunately, buying anything out of the States from Europe at the moment, the shipping costs and the delays, it's not good. Almost as bad as getting things in and out of the UK, and that's saying something. So even though the market for these, I suspect, is going to be the audio market more than the amateur radio market, it is nice to get another manufacturer back in the game. And what I found interesting is his company's not just going to produce the old models of valves again as they were. In the article, it actually says that they are reimagining, can't even say that, redesigning the 12AX7, the dual triode. So it'll be interesting to see whether in redesigning that valve they improve it in some way by using more modern features, technologies, or whatever into it. I mean, the production of valves is probably still using the same direction, but maybe the materials within can be better these days in some way. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. We haven't got the gentleman is called Charles Whitner, but we haven't got a actual name of the company, unless he's still using the Western Electric name, which is the plant he bought in Georgia. But it'll be interesting to see what comes out of there, and especially if he starts developing new versions of the old valves that maybe actually operate better. And all look to him. It's a risky business he's going into, trying to get into that business, competing against the existing market. And all success to him. And I wonder what we'll be talking about in a year's time about him, whether we're talking about another new version of a valve coming out, or that he didn't survive. But fingers crossed that he does.
Yeah, I look forward to that, because I always think, there are uses for valves, and it's one of those things that if somebody's making things to repair old equipment, then we're not sending it to landfill, which is good in my opinion. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, so I've just done a little internet searching here on this, and he is indeed using the Western Electric name, so he must have purchased that name as well. Yeah, I think he's shooting for the audio market for sure, and I think he's going to be charging lots and lots of money for these tubes. So I guess if I'm a ham, I'm not going to get my hopes up that he's going to be producing 6146s or the like anytime soon.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I spotted the other day, because I troll YouTube and I look for all sorts of things, and I came across a gentleman, and I haven't got the link in front of me, who's making Magic Eye tubes, but he's redesigned a Magic Eye, what would look like a Magic Eye tube. It's not a tube, and it's it's done solid state. So he's takes an old Magic Eye tube, cuts the glass, takes the innards out, puts a solid state inside in it, and he's now, thinking of having showing people how to manufacture them. But he even supplied a circuit in his YouTube video. But just goes to show there must be a market if people are going to this sort of lengths to make vacuum tubes, or, in this instance, what I'm talking about is the Magic Eye tube that, they do go soft after a period of time and they don't work very well. So, long way they survive for us who fix things.
I'll just make another comment here. If you go to westernelectric.com, the website is kind of Spartan, but he's got a little survey there. If you click on the I'm interested button, it takes you to a little survey, and you can vote for the type of tube you want him to manufacture.
Well, there you go, Dan. That's a good one, isn't it? So obviously he's listening to potential buyers' feedback and making sure they understand it. So good. That's a good one. Moving to our next news story, Caryn, this is one you put in. The FCC takes a deeper dive into satellites. That sounds interesting. Over to you.
Martin, what's interesting about this, first of all, is that the initial story comes across at first glance as just a simple reorganization of the agency. Just simply the FCC getting rid of one office and creating two departments. And that's, you can kind of figure, well, that's people shuffling papers, nothing more than that. But what's happened is the Space Bureau and the Office of International Affairs have been created, and they replace what was formerly known as the International Bureau. That bureau handled the licensing and regulation of satellite programs and international telecommunications. What I find interesting about this is this talks about the need also to get rid of space debris or manage the space junk out there, things that where the orbit has decayed. What troubles me, and maybe I'm not being fair, maybe it's too soon in the game to criticize, but no mention has been made of what this means for amateur radio satellites. Is it all satellites? Do amateur radios get an exemption from this? I doubt it, because they're satellites, they're up there. But the other question that comes to mind, and I think our other presenters have raised this as well, is the FCC doesn't own the right to regulate all the satellites up there, because some of them are not registered in the United States. They're not American satellites. How do you handle that? So lots of questions to be answered. I praise them for making a first effort. The timing on this, by the way, is quite good, because these two departments, newly created departments, will be coordinating their efforts. And one of the big things they're going to be doing later this year is going together to the World Radio Communication Conference in Dubai. I believe that starts in November. And so this discussion will be taking place quite visibly on the world stage. So wait and see. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, that's a good one, Caryn. And let's hope that, as I say, they do get to discuss this, because it is an international thing, and I think the FCC are probably driving this one, or trying to drive it and become a senior partner and show that they're doing the right thing. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think we may be jumping the gun a little bit here. They're still not official, unless in the past week they've been listed in the Federal Register, which is what happens here when you make these kind of changes. And like Caryn mentioned, this Office of International Affairs is the one that will be coordinating with other countries, which is, and of course, we in amateur radio know that to be a very important thing, because that's what we do in ham radio. But I don't know, maybe the thing would be to get in touch with your local congressmen and senators and just put in your 2 cents for amateur radio. Say, hey, I saw this news that the FCC is setting up this satellite bureau, and we don't want amateur radio to sort of get lost in the shuffle. So, make sure that when this happens that we're represented somehow. So that might be a strategy. And of course, we're thinking that the ARRL will do something as well. So, but again, that might be a thing to do, is to contact your director and make sure that he or she knows that this is a concern to you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Ed, last words on this one? I mean, space, it's always interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and the other thing is, part of this report is saying a lot of it's about internet and mobile wireless connectivity. And if we think about the number of satellites that are in orbit at the moment, in low Earth orbit, excluding military, which tend to be higher up anyway, I think we'll find that by far the majority are providing the new, or starting to provide the new internet services from space. So there is a logical link here between the FCC and space, because if we get to a stage where all internet's supplied from satellites, then they want to be able to control what's going on up there for the US airspace, space, or how would you define it? I don't know. Satellites over the US, and also they'd want to avoid those satellites being hit by space debris from something else. So yeah, the fact that the FCC is getting involved in this area makes a lot of sense, because that seems to be the direction that internet and cell phone connections may be starting to happen in the future. It's interesting as well that the splitting up the International Bureau into the Space Bureau and International Affairs Office. I guess the International Affairs Office will less liaise with other countries and more liaise with the ITU, which is the overbearing body worldwide for communications, whereas the space-related things may not go through the ITU. So it's a logical split that they're making in their structure, and I could see that being perhaps echoed in other countries as well. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, as I say, I think I think other countries, it's got to be a group of countries. It's got to be a worldwide thing, because satellites, unless they're geostationary ones, they're traveling around the globe all the time. And yeah, we don't want to get into a situation like the balloon situation where people start shooting them down because they go over their airspace, because you shoot a satellite, it's just going to create more space junk up there. Instead of having one bit of junk, you'll have multiple bits of junk. So I think, all in all, it's a good thing to at least start trying to do something about it now. We're probably too late, but it's worth a trial now. Right, moving on. Electrocuted by helping another ham. That sounds horrible. Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, this is a story that came up recently, and we got it in our newsline this time around. A well-known DXer and contester, and he was going to be a referee for the WRTC in Italy this year, Richard King, K5NA in Texas, become a silent key a week ago, and what he was doing was helping a fellow ham taking down the Yagi in the tower, and the antenna actually hit a live power line. And unfortunately, Richard got electrocuted through this, and was thrown to the ground, and he died shortly afterwards. And this is really very much a reminder to everybody, if there's power lines around or any work on antenna systems, please, please, please think of safety first. And I'm sure these guys were doing everything right, and they were unlucky, but at the same time, the accident happened, and we don't want these kinds of things happening in the hobby. And, you know, in this case, wearing a helmet or a belt doesn't help. That isn't the full solution. You've got to look around, you've got to plan, and you've got to be safe. And please, anybody considering working on antenna systems, just stop and think first and make sure you've got it as safe as it possibly can before you even start. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, certainly. And there's lots more to safety. You know, all right, this poor gentleman was electrocuted, but, you know, things falling out, the aerials falling off, or antennas falling off of masts, or masts coming down, hitting things, and all those sort of things. You've got to really understand what you're doing. Caryn, what's your thoughts?
Well, Martin, I was pretty horrified to read this story, and the only thing I really want to add is this on top of the caveats that Ed has issued. No matter how long you're doing amateur radio, this is obviously doesn't just happen to newcomers. No matter how long you're in the game, no matter how much of an expert you may be, electricity is certainly more powerful and deadly, and you need to keep your wits about you always. So let this death not be in vain. I know a lot of people, both in his family and in the greater community, are going to miss him, and I know he will be missed at the championship in Italy in July. Back to you.
Yeah, understood. Well, Dan, you teach amateur radio, and I've taught a number of courses as well. And the safety lecture is always the one where you think people are going to switch off, and they're kind of, this isn't radio. I come to learn radio. Why do I have to listen to this safety stuff? And I must admit, I do the safety one, and I have had a few people look at you after you do the safety talk and go, oh, I'm never going to pick a screwdriver up again, or I'm never going to do that again because it's dangerous. And you go, yeah, in the wrong hands, doing stupid things it is. But what do you think on it all?
Well, yeah, so I always say when I start teaching that particular chapter that this is perhaps the most important chapter in the book, and then I go on to say, we lose, 1 or 2 or 3 hams every year because of some dangerous situation that has occurred. But my take on this kind of is, on this particular situation, it sounds like it was unsafe from the beginning, right? I mean, just the fact that the antenna came into contact with the power lines kind of says to me that the tower was put up too close to the power lines to begin with. And so, I mean, if it was me, if it had been me, someone had asked me to help work on that tower, I would have said, well, no way, because this is already unsafe to begin with. So that's something to consider if someone asks you to help them put up a tower or take down an antenna, is, judge the situation for yourself before you do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the other thing is, guys, and I'm equally guilty of this myself. The brain still thinks I'm 21. The body says, hang on, son, you're having a laugh.
Yeah.
You can't do, sometimes the older we get, we can't do what we think we can do. So you have to be realistic about it. Now, that's not, in this case, the thing, but, just be careful. And not just antennas and electrocution. There are lots of things like, cables on the floor. If you trip over them, they become trip hazards. All sorts of things. You have to look out for safety. Safety, I'm sure all the presenters agree with me, is paramount. Without us, Dan and I, teaching the safety part of our hobby, we wouldn't have as many amateurs in the hobby, I think. And, you have to think of it as, we want people to be safe for a very selfish reason. We want to be able to work them on the radio. So, safety guys, just do a recce, have a good look round before you do anything. And as Dan says, we don't know whether the power lines went up after the antenna was put up or whether it was put up badly, and it should never have been put up there. We don't know that, but unfortunately, Richard is not going to be able to tell us one way or the other. And our condolences go out to Richard King's family. We were very sorry to hear this, so our condolences. Right, guys, so that concludes our news roundtable. Let's find out what the team have been up to since their last chat with me. Caryn, ladies first. I'm sure you've been out operating, haven't you?
Oh, yes. Spring is here. Spring is here, Martin. POTA, and more POTA. Been having a very good time finding new parks to activate, getting my outdoor antenna ready for action, and may retire the ham sticks. We'll see. On a rainy day, I might still operate from inside the car. So I have been getting out and enjoying it and looking forward to that. Not too much else on the agenda other than that. We have a few special event stations coming up, but I'm not aware of any need for me to be on the team. I thought there's one next weekend, which is for an awareness of helping fund research into pancreatic cancer. That's a really important one. I had written about that for Newsline. I don't know if I'm going to be an op for that. I believe that's just a 2-day event. But that's a really important cause, and people should check the calendar for that. But no, mostly for me, it's been POTA, and at this point, a lot of late nights with my studies on CW, trying to get that speed up somewhat, but more than speed, trying to get that character recognition a little more reliable and a little more proficient. So that's been my life, Martin. It's been good, though. It's all good. Back to you.
Yeah, well, thanks for that one. And I know you and I chatted a couple of weeks ago, and you were quite excited about going out, and your partner, he sat there and listens to you do Morse. Top guy. Mrs. B won't go out with me, but then I don't do Morse. Maybe that's where I'm failing, Dan. What have you been up to?
Well, there you go. Maybe you'll find a whole new meaning in taking up Morse code. Anyway, I have been operating Morse code. Over last weekend, my big news is that I operated in the Michigan QSO party. And I didn't just operate from home, which would have been boring. I went up to a small county, because in state QSO parties, you get multipliers for depending on how many counties you work in the particular state, right? And so I decided I'm going to activate a small county up on Lake Huron called Iosco County. And no one's convinced me otherwise, but I'm saying that I was the only station in Iosco County last weekend operating in the Michigan QSO party. And I had a blast. I took my KX3, operated low power, and I operated for about 7 hours and made close to 130 contacts, 129 to be exact. Mostly Morse code, a few CW. Even at low power, I was able to make some phone contacts, and generally had a blast. I didn't operate the whole 12 hours. It ran from noon to midnight because the weather was great here, and my wife and I went over to the lake and hung out at the lake. So, yeah, overall, that was a great weekend.
Certainly sounds it, Dan. Certainly sounds it. And I'm glad you got out and enjoyed yourself with the family as well, because that's also important. So that was a good one. Well, Ed, I know you've had a lurgy for about 3 weeks, but you're back with us now. So I take it you haven't actually had much chance to do much radio.
No, that's right. My activity has been limited quite a bit by the flu, or whatever it was, which took between 3 and 4 weeks to actually get through it. And then when I got through that, the weather hasn't been nice here. It's been overcast, cold, rainy, generally depressing weather. So there was no urge, once I got a bit better, like last weekend, to go out and do any portable operations. But despite that, I've been, as I often do, doing some work on building some portable antennas to add to my super lightweight pack. So I've actually got 2 rucksacks, one with the 20-watt station in it, and masts and bigger antennas, wire antennas, etc. And then a very small rucksack with the 5-watt QRP radio in it, and throw bag cord to get antennas up into trees, and then lightweight antennas. And I've added a 40-meter antenna to that set. So so that I'm ready now when the weather does get better, and it's supposed to start to get better this the weekend that this podcast will be released, so that I can actually go and either walk to or cycle to some local GMA summits. GMA's Global Mountain Award. It's like SOTA, but it's for smaller summits, and if not for them, for HEMA and so on. So I'm getting everything ready for when I hope the nice weather comes, and I'll be out using 5 watts or so of sideband and hopefully working the world. And fingers crossed that I can get some nice exercise in, not overdo it because I'm also not the youngest, and enjoy some radio out in the fresh air. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, sounds like you've been having a little bit of fun, even just preparing.
Preparing,
yeah. Which is half the thing, If you don't prepare, then you won't get the maximum out of your trip out. So that's a good one. Well, what have I been up to? Well, I only get 2 weeks to work this one out, but I had to I rebuilt 2 of my hotspots. One because it appeared to work, and I thought I ain't getting very many calls through on DMR. And the thing was on, and it looked okay, and I blipped it, and I could see it was picking me up, and it was saying I was doing things. And it wasn't until I actually had a look on the Brandmeister dashboard, I wasn't actually making it to Brandmeister. So it had got itself in a twist somewhere, and I think I believe that SD cards are not the most reliable thing, although you don't have a lot of choice on a hotspot. But they do fail occasionally. So I rebuilt the hotspot and certainly been getting contacts again. So, I apologise for anybody who was looking for me and didn't hear me, but I have that working. And I took the opportunity to build my D-Star one as well, just so that I've rebuilt 2 out of the 4 that I have running in the house. If I'd have been on Yaesu Fusion, I'd have probably heard them, but I was actually on D-Star DMR and didn't hear. So sorry about that. I have been doing some work, a little bit of work playing with Arduinos, and I'm not a coder. I really am not, but the Arduino fascinates me, and I'm never going to be a big coder. Got a couple of nice books on the Arduino projects for amateur radio, which I've been playing with and one thing and another. I bought some time ago a Sotabeams filter, and I never did anything with it. I bought it, I was like, I'll do something with that, and then it got put in a box, and I forgot about it. Came across it the other day and thought, so I watched, I went on Sotabeam's site, and I got all the details of the stuff and the documentation down now, and I watched a very, very interesting video and thought, hang on, this looks like a next project I'm going to be working on. So I managed to get that ready for start work on that. So that'll be a good one. And last but not least, I've been on about for a long time of making myself a signal tracer, just so that I can sort of go down a radio and just hear what's going on instead of using a scope. And I don't know if it's the last episode, but I'd certainly built an audio amplifier for it. I built the probe just over a week ago, and it works very, very well. And I've had fun. So, I've gone back to doing simple things in some ways, but it's a simple piece of test equipment, but it actually works very well and a little bit of fun. So that's what I've potentially been up to. Not a lot of operating. I have been on the talk group a few times. I didn't actually make it out on HF this week. I was up on 4 meters for a while, but didn't actually turn the 7300 onto HF. So very naughty boy, as Edmund would have told me. So that's what I've been up to. Well, all that's left for me to do now is to thank you guys for turning up and helping me tonight, and enjoyed your company. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, thanks for having me, Martin.
Yeah, great as always, Dan. I'd like to thank Caryn and KD2GUT.
Always fun, Martin. Thank you again.
Yeah, great, Caryn. And Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
Thanks a lot, Martin, and apologies to everybody that I missed the 400th edition, and feeling fit and well again now. So here we go towards 500.
Yeah, well, it's the start. We put the stake in the ground now. We're on our way to 500. And Ed, it's only about 2 months to Friedrichshafen.
Yep. I've just got my parking pass and things, and all set to go down there. Just need to arrange the weather to be a bit nicer.
Well, most of it's inside, but yes, we'll enjoy it. I'm sure we will. Right. All that's left for me to do, say 73 to you guys. And we'll continue with the podcast. 73, guys.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert-free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief. Me, Colin M6BOY. We start off with news here that NASA and the Canadian Space Agency have announced the members of the Artemis 2 crew, which is a crew being sent to the moon to test systems for future moon landings of astronauts. 3 of the 4-person team are radio operators. That includes Commander Reed Wiseman, Kilo Foxtrot 5 Lima Kilo Tango, pilot Victor Glover, Kilo India 5 Bravo Kilo Charlie, and mission specialist Jeremy Hansen, Kilo Foxtrot 5 Lima Kilo Uniform. The other mission specialist is Christina Hammock Coke, but as unfortunately it doesn't appear to be a licensed operator. So the mission is scheduled for November 2024, and so it'll be lasting 10 days, where they'll be validating life support systems on the Orion spacecraft along with other demonstrations. So we wish the crew a safe journey and good luck with their efforts, and hopefully we'll be able to work some of the crew during their mission. In the UK, we're getting close to celebrating the coronation of King Charles III, and the RSGB and Ofcom have confirmed that the call sign GB23 Charlie can be used for the special coronation event station. The Cray Valley Radio Society, led by Bob, Mike 0, Mike Charlie Victor and Dave Golf 4 Bravo Uniform Oscar, are organising a flagship amateur radio station that will use the call sign from the 3rd to the 8th of May. So the call sign will be used from the Old Royal Naval College alongside the river in Greenwich in southeast London. So from the 10th of May onwards, the call sign will be available for individual clubs to use until the end of June, and further details that will be announced shortly. So say more, there'll be a link on the ICQ podcast webpage of more information of how this can be used. But also just let you know as well, there's also a special block of call signs available, and that's GB23 Bravo Alpha Alpha to Bravo Zulu Zulu, be available throughout the month of May and June as well for you to be involved in. So lots of potential activities and celebrating, say, the coronation of King Charles III. Dayton Hamvention happens in the next few weeks, and great news that the Westchester Amateur Radio Association have announced expanding opening hours of the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting will be available during that time. So on the Thursday, Friday and Saturday, the museum will be open till 9 p.m. and on Sunday be open from 12 to 5. Admission is $10 at the door. I would strongly advise anybody in the area to take this opportunity and say visit the museum. We had the opportunity to do this a few years ago when we were in Dayton, and it's an absolutely fantastic trip down to the guys there at the National Voice of America Museum. So take the opportunity and join the guys there. For more information, we'll pop the two clubs' websites on our webpage, so you'll be able to check out that from there. But as I say, for $10, it's well worth a visit. Right, well, now we head on to our features this episode, and we have a review of the MFJ8504 by Frank Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and I understand in HF Controls by Ed Durrant DD5 Lima Papa. So double episode, a feature for you guys. Hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Do you have a favorite antenna that you use for receiving? Perhaps one that's quiet and you really just get the best signal. Perhaps it's one of the hula hoop magnetic loops or another type of loop. Well, you have a problem, and here's what it is. Hello everybody, this is Frank K4FMH with a brief product review based on my experience as a shortwave listener and ham radio operator for a number of years. Of course, the problem I'm speaking of is if you have a favorite receive antenna, you typically want to use it on more than one receiver. Now, going back to yesteryear, back in the days of analog television, and we had one antenna outside and multiple TVs, we would use the old-fashioned method of taking twin lead and just splitting it by paralleling the connection on one TV and running twin lead to the other. Sometimes that worked, but usually only when the broadcast signal was strong enough so that the signal loss that we inherently obtained by splitting that signal was still strong enough to give us a good quality picture. But you get the point. Today, what do? Well, we can take a T connector and do the same thing, and we still may get that to work. But a better way of doing that is to use a multicoupler that balances the signal from input to output and gives the same voltage level to each receiver. Moreover, that still has some loss, but we can have an active multicoupler that has a low noise amplifier. I've been doing this for 10 to 12 years or so. I've been using a product from Stridsburg Engineering in my neighboring state of Louisiana, and I think I have 4 of those. All of them are active receiver multicouplers. You don't transmit through these. They have worked very well. But one can do this and still have a problem that you have to solve outside the multicoupler, but perhaps not any longer. MFJ Enterprises has had a product out for a year or two that I recently received, and it is the MFJ8504 SDR receiver multicoupler, and it comes either with BNC connectors or SMA connectors. But what the innovation here from MFJ is it has the option for built-in filters. And there are several that one can get. I have here in my hand an AM notch filter that's already in the box. I could add a low-pass filter, 30 megahertz, one of 2 high-pass filters, one HP1 from 1.7 to 450 megahertz, and HP2 from 30 megahertz up to 450 megahertz. Now, one of the antennas that I have in my loft is a discone antenna, and it doesn't have any gain to it, but it just is a huge wideband antenna. And I use that to feed a scanner and some of my SDR receivers. I also have an MFJ receiving loop as well as a Wellbrook 1530 receiving loop. So I have several antennas that I like to get fed into different receivers. Now, to make this problem worse is if you have bought one or several, in my case, of the modern SDR radios, you have that problem that I'm talking about. You have a good antenna or two, but you have to get it to more than one receiver. Now, I live north of the capital city of Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, in a little town called Ridgeland. We have a number of broadcast stations, none that are just terribly close to me, but enough that it can produce a problem. And so it's good to have the ability for this multicoupler to feed a receiver that I say don't want to pick up AM broadcast or don't want to pick up FM broadcast, because that can generate some harmonics up in a region that I really do want to hear. And one of the nice things about the filters that MFJ has for this is it will allow you to mix and match due to your use case. Now, in the 8504 itself, a couple of the specifications, it's got flat gain, less than 3 dB variation between 30 kilohertz up to 850 megahertz. There's a low noise, high dynamic range push-pull amplifier in to keep the signal levels up to the levels stated. Now, there's a 30 to 35 dBm output to the 4 output ports. One thing here is that there are 2 input ports, and the manual suggests that this is good for low band versus high band antennas. In my case, the discone would be certainly the preferred high band antenna, whereas my MFJ loop or my Wellbrook loop would be the lower HF band antenna. And so feeding one into each port, it will spread to all 4 ports. If you don't use all 4 ports, they can be terminated, and that might be a very desirable thing to do. This particular box runs on a typical 9 to 15 volt, 150 milliamp or higher power source with a typical barrel connector, center pin positive, so pretty standard there. There are a number of jumper configurations to fit this particular multicoupler to your use case. The receiver 1 port is the priority receiver output, and it's the first one that should be connected. It's shipped with the other 3 receiver ports terminated at 50 ohms internally. So you simply change a jumper when you want to use a port. Otherwise, it's generally dead-ended into a 50 ohm load. One of the problems one might have is, okay, if you're a ham operator and you've got transmitting antennas, how close can I get? Well, that's always a difficult one to give you an exact, say, number of feet or something there, but you have to use some good judgment. A field strength meter is good to try to get some sort of estimate there. We should do that anyway as we evaluate our amateur radio transmit exposure limits. But in my experience, I have just used some reasonable common sense to not place it within, say, 10 meters or so from a transmitting antenna. Sometimes that can be a challenge. One good thing about this particular product, it was designed by Tom Roush, W8JI, before he left the company, and there is a schematic for the main board and each filter, the high-pass filter, the low-pass filter, a notch filter, and a band-pass filter. Now, one thing that Tom did not complete when he left is a blank board so you could design your own filter. This is covered in the manual. But I suspect that a printed circuit board can be fabricated by the home brewer using the suggested values that the manual has, can be used with some software such as LC from Ton Software or LT Spice or some others to fabricate your own filter design. So this is something I think amateur radio operators and shortwave listeners should probably look at if they've got that favorite antenna, particularly if it's low noise and you've collected a number of SDRs that you want to feed them all at the same time, right? So the MFJ8504 I've had for about a year now. In comparison to the Stridsberg, it's very comparable. And I use the MFJ when I've got some receivers that I don't care much about AM or FM broadcast, and I want to filter those out. So I've put those filters in to try to handle that and have the other antennas fed to the receivers where I really want to do broadcast band DXing, which I've done for well over 50 years now. This is available on the MFJ website in US dollars. The 8504 is at about $170 US. That price may vary through the resellers, and the filters range for a little less than $50, depending upon which the filter is. This is something you might want to look at. Not every ham would have a need for it, but if you're like me and you've got those favorite low noise antennas that just seem to get the signal in, you want to get that to almost every receiver you have, don't you? And it would be good to use a multicoupler. The MFJ8504 is really worth taking a look at. This is Frank, K4FMH, with this product review.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
This short feature was prompted by a comment on another podcast, and is related to a radio fright when someone starts on the HF bands, i.e. newcomers to HF radio. For those who have got the t-shirt, you don't have to listen. Skip on to the podcast closed section. In some countries, the entry-level license only allows access to VHF and UHF, or perhaps very restricted privileges on the HF amateur bands. This short overview is for those getting their first HF band radio and are faced with a wall of new knobs or menu choices. Now, volume and on-off are always clear, but what about all the other buttons? I'll start by saying that radios designed for portable or mobile use will normally have less buttons. However, even they may have similar functions in the menus and submenus to what appear on either the front panel or the computer screen of a shack transceiver. Let's start with the basics. Every amateur transceiver has an on-off button or switch. It's sometimes combined with the audio or volume control. There is always some way to change bands, either a rotary knob or some on-screen band selection. The same with mode, as most radios on HF can operate in CW, single sideband phone on lower or upper sideband, and many still support AM, with newer designs supporting a separate mode for digital. If you don't have a separate mode for digital, you'll be using the SSB mode. You'll also have some way to set the output power from the transceiver, either a knob, possibly on screen, or adjustable in a menu setting. Of course, you need to tune across the band to listen to stations or to find a free spot to call CQ on. Although some of the faceplate-less SDRs will have you use the mouse wheel, on the majority of HF radios you will still have a large knob. After these basic controls, the number of other features you have will depend upon the make and model of your transceiver. All will have some way to control the bandwidth of the signals, i.e., how much of the band you are listening to at one time. On earlier radios, this selection was decided by which hardware, often crystal-based, filter boards were in the radio. In the simplest form, you may have three: one 500 Hz wide for CW, one 2.8 kHz wide for SSB, and one 7 kHz wide to receive and send AM. Nowadays, even on radios that are not an SDR, you will likely have Digital Signal Processing, or DSP, which allows you to set the passband filters to tune in to whatever width you want. DSP often also provides a notch filter to blank out that annoying carrier from some idiot tuning up on the other station's frequency, and DSP can also supply noise blanking to cut out lightning strike crashes or bad car electrics, and possibly noise reduction, which tries to improve the readability of a weak signal. Now, you may have a button labelled Vox. What that does is turn your radio to transmit as soon as it hears anything from the microphone. Normally this will be your voice, but if the level is set too high, background noise can switch your radio on to transmit when you don't want it to. If you're just getting used to this radio, that's probably better left turned off, and you press the button on the microphone or press down your CW key when you want to transmit. Two important keys for DX hunters are the RIT, Receiver Incremental Tuning, and XIT, or Triangle IT, Transmitter Incremental Tuning buttons. These allow you to set your radio to transmit on a different frequency than you are receiving on by a few kilohertz. If you don't have these keys, but have two VFOs in the radio and a split button, you can do the same thing and over a bigger frequency difference. Why would you want to do this? Rare DX stations attract a lot of callers, and if they all call at the same time over and over as they do, the DX station cannot make one caller out from another. So, the DX station often works in split mode, and often over a range of frequencies. On sideband, this may be announced as listening 5 to 10 kHz up. On CW, the amount would be a lot less. So the DX station might be transmitting on 14.220 MHz, but listening between 14.225 and 14.230 MHz. He or she can tune this range until they find a clear station to have a contact with. The callers don't want to keep retuning their radio with the tuning knob, so this is where XIT, or the split mode, comes in. The receiver is set on 14.220, and perhaps you have decided to call on 14.227 MHz. To do this, you either tune in 7 kHz extra on the XIT knob, or set your second VFO to 14.227, while leaving the main or first VFO on 14.220 MHz and pressing the split button. In both cases, when you press the PTT while listening on 14.220 MHz, you will actually transmit on 14.227 MHz. And, if you're lucky, when you release the PTT button, the DX station will return to your call by transmitting on 14.220 MHz as before. All of the stations who are wrongly calling on the DX station's transmit frequency will not annoy him or her, as the DX station's receiver is not listening there, rather tuning between 14.225 and 14.230 MHz. You may also have a separate or combined preamplifier and attenuator buttons. If you come from a background of operating SSB or CW on VHF and UHF, you would probably set all preamps on and all attenuators off. On the HF bands, it's not that simple. Preamps are generally used on the 20 to 10 meter bands when you have a very weak station, and sometimes the attenuator is essential for operation on 160, 80 and even 40 meters. Since the advent of SDR radios, often with a broad receive coverage, these two functions have become very important. When you need to use them depends on your antennas, which band you're on, and even the time of day. While the radio is still new to you, I would leave preamps and attenuators switched off. These were only the main buttons and knobs. Depending on your radio, there will be other functions. SDR radios come with a panoramic spectrum display, so you can see easily where activity or interference is on the band you have selected. Many radios have a built-in ATU, antenna tuner unit, but this is wrongly named. It is actually an antenna matching unit. If the antenna you have attached is not tuned, or resonant as we call it, on the chosen frequency, it is physically either too long or too short, and you can't change that from electronics inside the radio. What the ATU does is makes the best of a bad job, getting as much signal out and into the radio as possible. A resonant, correct length antenna is going to improve your station more than anything inside the shack can do. 50 or even 20 watts on a resonant antenna will beat 400 watts on a non-resonant one any day. Believe it or not, I'm going to ask you to do something very un-amateur radio-like and read the manual that came with your radio. And remember, there are always things to improve in your radio station. That's part of the learning curve and fun of ham radio. I hope you found these tips on HF radio knobs useful. 73, this is Ed, DD5LP.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our double feature in this episode, and hopefully there's always something for everybody to get your teeth into, be it be our review or I say our more Elmer feature there. So thanks to Frank and Ed for putting together those couple of features for us. Now, last episode marked our 400th episode. Hope you really enjoyed our recollections and thoughts, etc., and our fun that we had producing that show for you. And we're really grateful to Doug Rosser, VK2 Delta Charlie Romeo. He pops in a bit of feedback, and he gave us some more information about the ACMA delaying their decision making. So a couple of points he raised. He says the 6 meter band was limited to 52 megahertz to 54 megahertz when VHF analog television channel 0 was allocated 45 to 52 megahertz. As these TV channels were retired, some parts of the 50 to 52 megahertz band became available to amateur use under certain conditions. He said those conditions were deemed to be a bit hard for the then novice license holders and restricted the full, now advanced license holders, and this distinction has carried on when the novice license became the standard. And his second point is that the ACMA advice is a follow-up to a significant consultation later last year, and the submissions have been delayed as a result of that. So I say thanks for those follow-up pieces for you, Doug. As I say, we have this horrible knack, don't we, Dad, that these sort of Australian and German stories always appear on episodes where unfortunately our gentleman Ed Durrant, who know a lot about these sort of parts of the world, unfortunately is his cycle say to be rested for that week, or I say off the podcast for that week. So as I really do appreciate you, Doug, for chipping in and filling in with that bit of information, and I'm sure I know our friend Ed will be sitting there going, yep, Doug's right. So as I say, many thanks for letting us know there, and say good bit to get that information in from Doug, Dad, to say spread that whole sharing information between our amateur community.
Certainly is, Colin. And to use a terminology, that's the way the mop flops. Yeah, sometimes we don't have full insight on what's going on. I openly admit this, but it is nice to get the listeners to give us the update, and I will appreciate that update and hopefully remember most of it. And well, it's fortunate that the Australia is so far away from the UK for 6 meter contacts, because we have between 50 and 52 megs, and you have 52 to 54. So if we were countries next door to each other, we wouldn't be communicating on 6. But yeah, interesting. And it's always nice to get feedback from listeners. It proves you listen, guys. But there you go, Colin.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as I say, this one wraps up now. I think episode 401, as you say. Just so those who may not be aware, is our next big part of our project is we'll be attending the Friedrichshafen ham radio show in Germany. We've been just talking about arranging our tickets for that event. So as I say, anyone who's heading to Friedrichshafen, we'd love to see you there. As always, orange shirts, etc. I think we've got 5 going, if I remember rightly, of the group. So as I say, just get that one in your diary, guys, if you're attending that show from that side there. But in the meantime, as I say, obviously this episode as I say, couldn't have been done without our friends Dan, KB4 November Uniform, Caryn, KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, and Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, who also helps out with as a feature, and Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel as well for taking part and providing features for us. We'd also like to thank Paul Coppin, Mike 0 Yankee Mike Juliet, for his very kind donation to our episode here, keeping us advert free and showing the value he sees in the show and the information he gets from us. We always ask you guys, if you find to say some value in what we've done, go along to icqpodcast.com/donate. As I send a offering our way, and as I say, that goes towards keeping your show advert free, and as I keeping everything nicely running for you as the show that you love and enjoy. So we'd really appreciate your consideration for that. All right, that just about sums up episode 401. One last thing to do, obviously, and that's Mrs. B's cup of tea, and hopefully a fine chocky biscuit for her as well.
Certainly will, Colin. And we had some new chocky bickies into the house yesterday. So, yeah, there's a few in the tin for her. And, yeah, I'm going to make that cup of tea as soon as we put the mic down. So I'll say 73s to you and all our listeners, and see what we can do the next time.
We will do, guys. 73s all. Catch you in a fortnight's time.